Are you seriously going to eat, you fat blibbity blabbity blob? I mean,
It's
some of you might be like,
continual.
why would I want to start this?
Sensitive. She's sensitive.
You are listening to the Tammy Talks Unscripted Healing Podcast, where we share stories that are, you guessed it, unscripted.
That's the thing, this journey doesn't stop.
It doesn't really
right?
end. We have a general sense of the topic each episode, but really the whole point is just to show up and be authentic and let our inner child speak its truth. And I have continued to work through that story of constantly hearing, well, we don't want, got a hot dog on our hands. Yeah, guess what, Mr. Sabatsky, you do. So I'm so excited that you are here, and it is my hope that you hear yourself somewhere in the story so that way you can feel seen and heard as well. So let's start talking. Welcome to the Tammy Talks Unscripted Healing Podcast. I am so excited to be back, and I thank you. For those of you that are coming back each week, thank you, thank you, thank you. And for those of you that are brand new and tuning in for the first time, welcome. I've got a fun one for you today, and this one is also very near and dear to my heart because me and this person also go way back. If you listened to last week's, you know that I talked with my dad, and whoa, that was an episode. All the feels. And I knew that that was going to happen. I knew that I was going to have a lot of emotion coming up. I knew he would too. I think it was kind of fun that he was so surprised about that. And I use fun loosely because I know that's not most people's idea of fun is feeling emotion, but I love it. And I get really excited when I see people actually feel and allow themselves to express emotion. I get very excited about that. But I have to thank all of you that did listen and that gave feedback about it and how it impacted you. That is why I'm doing this podcast. It is literally for that reason. And I received some of the most beautiful messages from some of you listeners about how listening to him, really honoring his story and realizing like, wow, yeah, I really could have used some support back then. Some of you are realizing, oh, wow, maybe I deserve support with what I've been going through too and what I have been suppressing since childhood and maybe trying to unpack that a little bit, even though you may not realize how it's impacting you in your everyday life. Kind of hearing how it was impacting my dad still 55 years later woke some of you up to be like, I need to look at this. I can see how this is still impacting me. And oh my gosh, I deserve support. And so that was amazing. The other really powerful thing that came from that episode was how many of you started to reflect on your relationship with your dad. I am incredibly blessed to have a very close relationship with my dad. You know, and we've talked about that. And actually, even before I left that day, we had a pretty deep conversation about when I was much younger and things were different. And so I can see how our relationship has evolved as he has like honored more of himself and allowed himself to be vulnerable. So that way he was an emotional safe space for me. And he's been able to do that over the years for me. And so that's where that came from. But it really made some of you think about your relationship with your dad. And I think kind of opened up that inner child maybe craving that kind of connection. And in some people, maybe your dads are no longer with us. And so it feels like, oh, that's a lost cause. I can't do that. That is not true. There is so much healing that can still happen in that. Whereas if your dad is still here and you're like, there's no way, like he's set in his ways and we're never gonna, the healing starts with you. The healing starts with you. Everyone has their own journey, but you can just hope and pray that when you heal, it just naturally helps heal others. By you opening your heart, it allows people around you to start to open theirs as well. And so there's so much healing that can happen no matter what your case is. But that healing comes from you. Whatever you maybe have needed from that relationship with your dad is what your inner child needs from you. Like that's kind of inner child 101. And so, again, if you ever want help validating your story or unpacking that, please reach out because I know it's not something most people want to just like do on their own and things come up and you want to be able to sort through that. But I can also help give that perspective of like what your dad might have been going through and why he might have been blocked and maybe how he was trying to show love in his own way, but it wasn't in a way that you received it. And so, it got confusing and your ego took over and said, no, I'm blocking this altogether. Yeah, all that kind of stuff. So it was a really, really powerful episode. And they thank you all so much for just all the love that you poured back into me and into my dad. And I made sure that he knew the impact that had. and make sure that little Paul felt all that love and support that he always deserved. So thank you guys so much. Then it was interesting. The next thing that I wanted to share was right after I got this really powerful message from this woman who had finally started receiving support. Again, no one else in her family is talking about what happened years and years ago, but she had messaged me. She's like, "Hey, I know this is out of the blue, but I just needed to tell you this." I'm gonna start crying. How much your podcast is helping me. And I was like, I didn't even know this woman was listening. I had no idea she was listening. And so I was just, whoa. So she ended up starting to go get some therapy and to start working through this and process this and all of these things. And I was just so taken back. And so I literally burst into tears after I read her text. And, and I'm sitting there and I always do my little, prayer meditation thing after I have my shake in the morning. And it was right when I got her message. And so I'm sitting there like all emotional and things. And I'm thinking about her journey and I'm starting to think about mine and, where all of this is taking me and like how much I really love this podcast and how I just want it to grow so it can reach more people like her. And I'm just kind of asking God, universe, I'm like, how are we going to keep this going and doing this? Because this is obviously making a difference in someone's life. I know it's making a difference in mine. Like, throwing that out there because I know the how isn't up to me. And so I sit back, I close my eyes, I put on my music, and, my little prayer meditation turns into like a 20-minute nap. But anyway, I do get up at 3 or 3:30 in the morning. So back off. I can do a morning nap if I want one. And no joke, took this little 20-minute nap. I wake up to another text from a woman saying that she wants to sponsor the podcast. I was like, I'm telling you guys, ask and you shall receive. Then I burst into more tears because I was just so overcome with how quickly God's like, okay, yeah, this is what you're supposed to be doing. We need you out there. We need you shining the light on this stuff. Here's support. Here's support to keep this going. And I was just speechless. And if you've been listening to me for a while, you're like, really, Tammy? That even possible? To talk a lot. So, so I am so excited for my absolute first Tammy Talks Unscripted Healing Podcast sponsor. It is from My Fit Tribe, and Erica Sweeney is the beautiful soul behind all of it. I was blessed enough to meet her in the gym. Actually, she's got an amazing story. And so I can't wait to have her on to share that because she decided to take on bodybuilding at age 45. And all of the reasons behind it are probably not what most people would think. And so she has such an incredible journey. And that's why she's so passionate about creating this community of other people that want to better their lives mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Like she's kind of trying to do like one-stop shop. Here we are. Let's go, people. Let's gather up, build this community and start supporting one another and be able to have resources for people who might not know where to go. Someone that might not know, hey, there's this Tammy chick, she does inner child work, or hey, there's someone who does grief counseling, or hey, there's a personal trainer. It's kind of, she's gathering, like all of these different coaches and resources to be able to support more and more people like you that are looking for help, looking for support because you deserve support. Again, what inner child doesn't want some help? How many of them really want to go and do all these things on their own unless they're trying to prove to their parents that they can, right? So let that guard down and allow yourself to receive help. And so the MyFit community is where she's trying to do that. And so you can follow that on Instagram and Facebook and be a part of that community. And if you're local to the Madison area, she hosts events. She has monthly yoga. They had some speakers in there and not too long ago. And it's just what she's doing is incredible. And it's truly just because she loves it and she's so passionate about it because she's been on her own journey. Anyone that has like gone through their own healing spiritual journey literally wants to just pay that forward and wants to be able to take what they have learned and help other people. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And that's really, I think, the whole purpose is God's like, yo, I gave you this gift. Go find it. Well, we went and found it. And now we're trying to share it because that is the whole point. Like the gift isn't just for you. The gift is so you can help other people. And so that's when you really, really tap into things. So anyway, I'm so excited. I'm so blessed. I'm so honored. So thank you so much, Erica and the MyFit Tribe, for kind of helping support me and little Tam over here in our inner child healing mission. So thank you. So that was my other exciting news. I wanted to share that with all of you, but I see my guest just hopped on. She's in the waiting room and I am so excited for this guest because I have known Jamie since I was in 7th grade. And the reason I wanted to have her on here is because she has such an incredible story. Again, like I know where she came from. I played on her farm and all those things. Like I know where she came from and what she has done to change her story, to change her life is so incredible. And to hear the journey and the changes that she had to make within herself and the healing that she had to do is truly incredible, and just setting like no limits on what she was capable of, not being put in this small box and just allowing herself to expand and continue to grow. But there was so much healing that had to come with that. And so to hear her career story, but it's so much more than just a career story. It's really a personal development story. It's really a healing journey story. It's all of those things. And I absolutely adore this woman, and she is someone that inspires me all the time, and I can't wait to have her on here. So I feel so fortunate, but I'm gonna let her on, and then I'll give her the official welcome. Hold on one second here.
Oh, hi.
Hey girl. Hey.
Hey.
So Jamie, my dear friend, is the editor-in-chief of Experience Life, a national whole life health and fitness magazine that helps nearly 2 million readers live healthier lives each issue. She's also the vice president of content strategy for Lifetime, which publishes Experience Life and operates more than 170 athletic country clubs around the United States and in Toronto, Canada. Additionally, because if that wasn't enough, Jamie is also a co-host of Lifetime Talks, the award-winning podcast. So you guys can see, like, I have total, like, I'm sweating because I'm like, it's like the pressure's on to have. She's like,
We do this just
in
like
her
you do, just
living
so you
room and a
know.
crappy mic and just trying to be a podcaster. But I'm like, yeah, I am. But yeah, she's an award-winning podcaster right here. So anyway, their podcast is aimed at helping listeners and viewers achieve their health and wellness goals. In 2023, in addition to the podcast being named the top health and wellness podcast for consumers by Folio, did I say that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Jamie and her team were honored with multiple editorial design awards, and Jamie herself was recognized as editor of the freaking year. So she lives with her husband and her 2 daughters in St. Paul. And so that's why, like, there's a big distance between us. And that's what's kind of made it tricky over the years. But it's
Yeah.
just so here's the thing, guys, is Jamie did not just get handed these positions. I don't even, do I want to say it? I think maybe should I let you say it? Like how you started?
Well, yeah, I can go into it. Also, can we pause for a second? Is my audio okay? Because I don't even, I'm a podcaster, but I don't even have my microphone hooked up.
I
I'm
can
just
hear
using,
you. Like, well, trust me, everyone that's listened to my podcast is like, this is probably as good as it's been because the last few I was out in the country with my dad and in his shop, and so I can hear you.
Okay, good. Let's just go with it then. We're going to go
Go
with
with it.
All right. So you want me to talk a little bit about how I got here in my career?
I feel like I should have just like hit it with the punchline there, but because there's so
You told me
much.
to.
Okay,
Yeah.
you go.
Okay, so here we go. So I left our hometown area, our small rural Southwest Wisconsin area in 2001, came to the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. So I'm still in the Twin Cities, started here in my education and pretty quickly decided that I wanted to go into journalism, right? So I, declared my major and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, am I going to do PR? Am I going to do broadcast? What am I going to do? And then I ultimately kind of dipped my toes into each of those areas. Like, nope, those aren't right for me. And then I ultimately ended up in magazine journalism. Did a couple of internships, one with a newspaper that I was like, ooh, that pace is not going to be right for me. Right.
Yeah.
Not going to fit. And then I did, it was my final semester at the U of M. I was getting ready to graduate with my degree in it was journalism with a focus in professional journalism with a focus in magazines. When my adjunct professor asked me what I wanted to do, like, if you could do anything you want to do, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I would love to work for a health and fitness magazine. Like, that's really what I want to do. And I said, I'm probably gonna have to move to New York to do it because that's where, magazine publishing is big and that's where that happens. And she looked at me, she goes, actually, there is a health and wellness magazine based right here in the Twin Cities. It's published by Lifetime. It's called Experience Life, and I write for them. She was a freelance writer. So she made this introduction for me to the then editor-in-chief, and she was the founding editor. And we talked on the phone. I think it was like a week after I graduated. And within a week after that, I had started an internship as an editorial intern with the magazine. So I didn't even know this magazine existed, but then it was like talking to people, putting your information out there, just kind of saying, here's what what I want to do. This is my dream. And was connected with the founding editor of this magazine that had been in publication since 2001. So this was 2005, June of 2005. I was hired as an editorial intern. And then 3 months later, I was hired as a full-time associate editor, fact checker. And honestly, things have snowballed from there. I
Yeah.
raised my hand and got involved
So
in
much so you
website
took over the
development.
company.
Yeah, I mean, I like was like, oh, there's a project where I can get involved with a website development. I'll learn about that. Like, I'll do that. So it was very much like this proactive thing. We were a really small team at the time, so I had the opportunity to raise my hand and get involved in things that probably I had no business initially getting involved in, but got to learn as I was going, and that led to eventually like I led our digital initiatives, right? Like, so then I was. That was like as Facebook and social media was coming about. So we then had a social media presence. We had a website. We started newsletters, all these things. Just I will try and fast forward this. I always stayed connected with the editorial. So yes, I was doing digital. I was seeing how that world was evolving, but I was always tied to the editorial. So fast forward to 2015, our founding editor was like making this decision that it was time for her to go. I had expressed to her like I am really interested in more of a leadership role, and she'd been pulling me into things for quite a while. So as she made that decision, she ultimately recommended me for the role of editor in chief for the magazine. I was given that position, and it was kind of on a like, well, let's see how this goes. And 7 years later, I'm still in this role doing that. Plus, I'm running
Okay.
content strategy for the company and podcasting and all these other things. So I have a team, I have an amazing team, and I wouldn't be able to do what I do without them, but it's a lot. It's snowballed.
So I obviously take everything to like an inner child perspective. And what is so amazing about what you have done throughout your entire career is allowed yourself to be led by curiosity. Like, that sounds
Mhm.
interesting. I think I want to try that versus what
Yeah.
if I'm not perfect at it? I can't do it then. Like,
Yeah.
that's what so many people get stuck and are afraid to go try new things and to raise their hand because what if I feel stupid? What if I fail? What if whatever? And you're like, what if I figure it out? What if I love it? What if I end up finding the
Absolutely.
next thing? Like, you just continuously believed in your inner child and be like, let's just try it. Let's just go. Let's just see what
Yeah.
happens.
It
And
was
that,
all about being proactive. You know what I mean?
yes.
It was kind of like, and it was probably in some cases a little naive, to be completely honest. I've always been kind of a glass half full person. Like, oh, you're going to give me feedback. I'm not going to take the negative of that. I'm going to see like how I can spin it and make it better. Right. So that was always my mindset. It was like, okay, I can try it. If it doesn't work, there's this other thing that I'm pretty sure I can do. Right. Like I knew I had skills in certain areas, but it was pretty interesting, and to be empowered by people to do that, I was like, I was
Yeah.
encouraged by that, by my leadership to say, like, "Tell us what you're interested in, tell us what you wanna do." And, hopefully, I'm giving that back to my team now and, like, encouraging them to do the same thing because I don't ever think, like, just because you're in this role that you're boxed into a place. I think I want people to be curious, to raise their hand when they're interested in something because I just don't think that we're all meant to just be in these, like, straight line, like, tunnel vision roles. I think there's so much room to explore and learn and expand.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and that's an amazing thing that you're doing for the people that you're working with now is to create that safe foundation.
yeah,
And again, that goes with all of the inner child stuff is like everyone just wants like emotional safety because if you have emotional safety and you're supported in that, you will trust, you'll jump, you'll go for things because you know you have this like landing pad of support behind you. But if that's
yeah,
shaky and you don't know and you don't have great leadership, people aren't going to feel comfortable taking those risks. And so that's an amazing gift. Like probably a
exactly.
very healing gift for some of the people that work for you is be able to provide that because that's maybe something that they didn't receive growing up and
Right.
very cool. But I love the message of what that sends to your inner child. And for everyone hearing this is like your inner child wants to try new things. It wants to see
Mhm.
what it's capable of. It doesn't care if it messes up or finds out like, no, that actually wasn't for me. Digital wasn't for me. This like part of
Yeah,
that whole exploration is figuring out what doesn't work.
right.
We see that as failure. Like, no, I just found out what doesn't work, what doesn't align.
Well, exactly, like and that's a question, on the podcast that one of my co-hosts often is like, it's like, "What is failure? It's an opportunity to learn," right? And
Yes.
he reiterates that over and over again. I gotta give a shout out to David Freeman because he's been such a great, like, he's my I call him my podcast kinda husband and friend, like, he's just there, like, he gives me such great insights
Just
and more
Nelly.
things to think about too, like, you know.
I
But
love
anyway,
that.
it's a mindset piece of it, you have to be willing to fail and then learn. And it's not always even failure. It's just things just sometimes just don't work out.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, we experimented, we tried something. I think being in the digital space gives you permission to do that too, because you
Yeah.
can try things quicker and like, oh, this worked or this didn't work. Now what? What's the next thing? So we're constantly doing that too.
So let's go back to some of the childhood stuff then, because obviously that mindset had to come from somewhere and you've had to work through some stuff to get to that place where you can confidently now do that in your career. But that it hasn't always been how it was for you.
Right. Well, I mean, I think so similar to you, Tammy. I mean, you and I've talked about this. I had a really pretty idyllic childhood. Like I grew up in this rural community on this country road that was just really quiet and we could run and play and do all these things. But that wasn't without certain changes and losses and things that happened. I mean, when I think about like growing up, I was 8 years old when my paternal grandmother passed away. And that shift, within a couple of years of that, we moved from like this small farm down the road from where my grandparents lived to literally a mile up the road. That mile up the road meant we changed school districts. Like, so I went from being in like this one school, I went to a Catholic school in a small town to shifted and then went to a public school. And then it was shortly after that that our schools combined. And it's so interesting how like just that 1 mile, you
Yes.
wouldn't think it would make that big of a difference, but it ultimately, changed the trajectory. Like had that not happened, I would have been in a different district. I probably would not be where I am. And so like,
Ooh.
that just kind of keeps you going. And this gets to the idea you and I have talked about too, this idea of counterfactual thinking. It's something that in this book that I love, it's like finding, what did I say? It was called Finding Purpose, Finding Meaning by Emily Esfahani Smith. But she talks about this idea of when you look at moments in your life, kind of these turning points, and you question, like, well, what would my life be like?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it could and would have been completely different if this hadn't happened. That's not to say that I wouldn't have like given everything for my grandma to be around longer in my life. I absolutely would have. But if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be where I am. And that's true for anything that's happened along the way. And it's either we can look at them as negatives or we can just look at them as part of our experience and what's brought us to where we are. And how do we move forward with those things? So, that's like one example, like that 1 mile up the road that changed
Yeah.
things.
That's
But that was a
powerful though.
loss, to lose a grandparent at a young age and to know what loss feels like and to remember that. And then to see kind of what happens next.
Yeah.
And it did. I mean, like meeting new friends, getting involved in things. And, you know this. As I was growing up, was very and still am sometimes susceptible to peer pressure. I definitely gave into those things. I like let myself be talked into things I probably shouldn't have because I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be cool. And that ultimately also led me to make some choices that probably weren't the best choices for me at the time. But again, I still think about it as looking back now, had I not made those choices, I wouldn't know what I know. I wouldn't be where I am. And I can either dwell on that or I can like grow from it. And hopefully that's what I've done. I've tried to do that. That doesn't mean sometimes I'm like, ooh, I'm gonna avoid that situation because I don't want to deal with that
Yeah.
again. But you know what I mean? Like those are the
Yeah.
things, like every choice leads us somewhere. And it's like, how do we either make the most of it or, I just don't want to dwell. I don't want to live in hindsight and wish for something different.
Well, right. And you start to see yourself like that's not who I am. And as we were talking before this, of the role that ego will take on. And that's actually when you start to realize like that's not actually who I was at that time. Like that was ego protecting me because it wanted to fit in, because it wanted to be
Mm.
seen, because so, oh my gosh, now that I actually know who I am, that wasn't me at all. Like that was a character.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
and so many of us start so early, in
Mhm.
elementary, in especially middle school, where it's like, well, who should I be today? Because again, that every kid was desperate need to fit in. And ego can sometimes go
100%.
to some really extreme lengths to make that happen and puts us in situations that maybe we're not proud of, or maybe that could have got us in trouble or hurt or whatever. And so when you
Mhm.
start to look at that, like, wow, that actually wasn't me. So I don't need to continue to attach that to my identity because now I
Right.
can see that that was just ego's protection.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
that
yeah,
wasn't really who I was. I mean, deep down, I think I knew who I was, but it was so that the ego part of me was so scared of not belonging or fitting in
yeah,
that I was willing to just ignore that inner child part of me that was telling me like, this is not the right choice.
okay.
But ultimately, it was still a choice I made. right? And led me to here. And I'm like, how much do I say here? How much do I don't say? But, I made some choices that ultimately, like when pretty in high school, that led to some reputation issues, if we want to call them that, where, I made some choices, and I will just say, like, I remember writing about in college in hindsight, because I was in this women's studies class, like, where have you been biased against?
Oof.
And, as a white woman, I was like, oh, I can't really relate to some of the other people in this class who have faced real bias, whether because of race or religion or whatever. But where it came from me, came to like decisions around like my sexual choices, right? Like I made a decision in high school that, I was sexually active earlier than I probably should have. But the reputation that gave me was that I was kind of a whore for doing that, and he was a hero. And I let that stick with me, and I let that kind of lead me to make other choices that I probably shouldn't have. I let that become a part of my ego too.
Yeah.
Um, in hindsight, I know that that's just, I was young, my brain wasn't fully developed, all these things, but it's still part of it. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, some of that stuck with me for much longer than I would have liked, but as you and I have discussed as well. So
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to
Well,
get into that too, like how that came back to haunt me.
oh
as
yeah,
women's
we'll
women's
get
power.
there. What I love about that though, and this is what happens all the time, especially with inner child stuff, is people are like, well, I didn't have it as bad, or how could I compare my story? Even my dad said that last week after he told his story. I was like, dude, like we just need to validate our stories. And so by you sitting in that class, yes, thinking, what, I'm a white woman, like what can I possibly, but it's like, well, if all that is true, and this was the bias I faced. And like
Yeah.
validating that story for you and your inner child, like then it just like frees you from it. Cause your inner
Mhm.
child's like, thank you for finally validating that. And now we can move on. Now we can actually start to work
Mhm.
through, oh my gosh, that was ego. That was protection. That wasn't who I really was. It
Yeah.
just, it opens up the floodgates of healing when you simply validate your story. So that is like, there's a reason that you specifically remember that moment because it was probably a huge turning point to have that. Wow, I deserve to validate that. Like, but this is no
I
longer who I am.
I do remember that. I remember that being incredibly freeing to actually write it down and say, this was my experience, because it had always, it was with me, and it was always kind of lingering. It was in the back of my mind. And I did let it kind of continue to inform how I showed up in certain situations. And it was kind of at that time, it wasn't long after that. Gosh, it was probably like a year later that I ended up like meeting who would eventually become my husband. And like, I think that's probably for a reason, because I had changed the story about myself. I had like made peace in some ways with what had been and the choices I had made. And like, okay, that's what it was. And now it's just part of the experience, and I can keep moving forward. Right.
I have so many goosebumps right now. If anyone can see. I love it because it's like, okay, here was this chapter that I have just left open because I don't want to go read it again. I'm just going to ignore it, but it's still there. It's still open. And what you did was
Yeah.
like, no, let me read this one more time, find the truth around it, close that chapter. Let's move on. Like that's
Yeah.
what can happen. I think so many people feel like they have to stay stuck in these stories. Like if I open this back up, what's going to happen? Like, oh, you can heal from it and move on and create a new chapter. And the fact that just like I closed the chapter, boom, I found my husband. Like what?
Yeah. It was probably it was like
Ooh,
a year
manifester, girl.
from it.
Like,
Yeah.
oh, I wanted to be in a work for Health and Fitness magazine. Boom, there you go. Wow, that's
Oh, man.
you met her.
That just kind of occurred to me too. It's like, oh yeah, when you put it out there, when you speak the truth about it, like how it's been affecting you, just what difference that can make. Even just to release it and to put the words out there. Cause I think I told you this before too, like I was afraid to ever talk about it.
Yeah.
And like even into my career, I was afraid to talk about that aspect of my life, even though it happened in my youth and I knew I wasn't
Right.
mature. And and it's like, but I was still afraid to talk about those things because it's like, oh, what will people think of me now? But I'm like, I'm not that person. That
Right.
was a different part of me, like, things have changed, and again, it's brought me to here, right? Like, I can either, and I think we were talking to, like, what the title of this episode is, "You're the editor of your story," I think is what you were loosely referring it to, and I can either edit it for the negative and keep dwelling, or I can think about what do I want this story of myself to be going forward, and authentically be me going forward, hopefully.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think you started to realize, like, wait a second, like I actually get to write this from here on out and know like
Mhm.
what parts of ego I need to leave behind. But like you had said, oh, there may be areas where this has still like ego still wants to kind of play a part. It's like, no, 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 this is a new chapter. But he was like, but can I come in?
Yeah.
Can I open this
I'm just
door?
gonna come back and
This
haunt you a
more people
little bit.
pleasing. But you're right. So share a little bit about how you saw you had some massive healing, massive shifts. And again, this always happens in layers. Always
Mhm.
happens in layers. So that was a huge thing. But then you're getting more comfortable, you're doing other things, and all of a sudden it's like it kind of shows up again, but in a different way, and now challenging you in a different way.
Are you referring to your bachelorette party?
Oh, well, sure. Yeah.
Well, which one were you referring to?
Yes, yes,
Like,
let's go there. Let's go there.
so, so I, obviously, like that was part of my story, but even as I was like, as life was progressing, right? So, yes, I've alluded to meeting my husband. We dated for 3 years. We got married. I got pregnant 3 years later. And I was at your bachelorette party, bridal shower bachelorette party. And I'm like,
Very
oh my
quick.
gosh, I'm in this new phase. I was pretty pregnant. Like, I was visibly showing. And we're out and we're out. And I'll just never forget somebody that was with us brought up like the reputation I had in high school. And I just remember pausing and being like, wait a second. Like, I'm married. Like, I'm married. I've got a baby bump right here. And that's what you remember about me. And I remember being just kind of sad about it, being like, oh, like, why is that coming back? And ultimately, I realized it really wasn't about me in any way, right? Like, that
Right.
was some
Right. It was
old thing for somebody else to deal with.
yeah.
But it was just this moment where it came back from like, oh, this, and I told you, like, this is why I sometimes would like avoid situations in public, like going back home, because I felt like that's the version of me people remember. Like, even though all these other things have happened and life has changed and all these, like we're 20, almost 25 years later, there's still whatever reason, it's like that's still that teenager person who lived there.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, life is so different now. And that's what you remember about me. And I was just sad about it. I remember being like, I can't let it haunt me, but I remember it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Any sense.
It totally makes sense. And I think it's so important because so many people that are trying to better themselves, like we would think like everyone in your life would be like, go you rah rah. But that's not always how
Mhm.
that works. And again, we have to understand that it's not a personal thing. It's
Right.
usually a projection of what this other person is going through. But it's so interesting of how people in our lives want to hold on to this character that they know, that they're used to. And like, no, this is the role that you play in my life. This is how we interact with each other. And you start changing up that role. It's like, whoa, I get that script. Like, hold on here. And it is. And
Yeah.
that's very triggering. And I absolutely went through this stage where, when I have this massive awakening of who am I? Like I had
Right.
to go, I use the chrysalis and butterfly analogies. Like I had to go
Yeah.
into this chrysalis to figure it out. Well, I turned into like a pile of goo and mush, and like I literally had no idea. And in that fragile state, I had to be really, really protective of my energy and who I was around, of who was trying to project things onto me and tell me who I was or trying to fix me or this or that. Like I couldn't have any outside input because
Yeah.
everyone has their own idea and version of who they think you should be and who you are, who you were. And
Yeah.
so it's like I had to, and I know there were people in my life like, where the hell did you go? Why aren't you, And I was like, I'm in my, I'm sorry, like I'm in my crystals. Like I couldn't. It was like I had a massive like spirit team around my little chrysalis. Like, leave her alone. She's got to find herself in here. And I did. Like I was really kind of went into isolation. I was just like me and my paddleboard that summer.
Right.
And, but now there's times where, because I felt before, I remember one distinct moment I shared something that I was really excited about with some people that I assumed would also be excited. They were not. It was like
Mm.
crickets. And I was like, oh, and
Yeah.
I felt it. I felt myself dim your light. Dim your light,
Mhm.
Tammy. This is too much. And again, kind of this sadness of like, but like I literally like vibrationally had to turn it down.
Mhm.
And it was kind of after that that I was like, I can't risk that anymore. I can't do that
Mhm.
anymore. And so, but it's very interesting of how you changing and people thinking like there are other versions of you. You are who you are. Like, oh my gosh, like I'm not even the same person I was yesterday. But especially I think a year ago.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. Well, I think this goes to I wrote a letter about this in the magazine. I keep saying, I told you about this, Tammy, remember? Like But
It's just us talking. There's no one else listening.
I know, right? But it was about this whole idea of change. Like I had listened to a podcast and I wrote about it. It was essentially like if you think about change is happening all the time, but we don't see it in the present moment, right? So if you ask me today, Jamie, how's your life going to change in 10 years from now? It's probably like, oh, it's not going to change that much. Like, yeah, I'll be older. My kids will be older, but I'll probably live in the same place. I'll have the same friends. I'll listen to the same music, blah, blah, blah. Have a lot of the same interests. And then you ask me, Jamie, how has your life changed since 10 years ago? And I'm like, oh,
Whoa.
my life
Yeah.
has changed a lot. Like 10 years, there has been so much change that has happened. And so to think that,
Whoa.
the version of me 10 years before that is still the
Right.
person I am now. So 20 years ago, Jamie, still I am like, no way. Like that's a totally different person because of the accumulation of experiences, the accumulation of knowledge, the accumulation of just life happening. Like you are changing and becoming someone different. And that doesn't mean that each version along the way wasn't you in some way, shape, or
Right.
form, but like who I am now is different than who I was 20 years ago. It's who I am now is different from the who I am in 10 years. And I'm okay with that as long as I'm authentically living in it. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
when I'm hiding myself or pretending to be somebody I'm not, that's a problem. When I'm trying to people please. And I think that's been a big thing for me is to your point of like, I'm showing up and I'm sharing with people like what's going on. Sometimes you have to put up, whether you call them boundaries or guardrails, just to protect that.
Yeah.
And you can always, like, if they're guardrails, you can move them as
Yeah.
things change, right? But
Yeah.
at some points, you kind of have to do that to protect yourself, to protect your inner circle, to protect those people. And that's hard because you find yourself wanting to move them really quickly for people to keep everybody happy. And you can't do that. But like it's who I am right now. Here are the kind of the boundaries, guardrails I have around this person so I can show up authentically and go from there. And I will like first to say, do not do this perfectly. There are some people I'm like, I bend to more than others. And like other
gosh.
people. But
Yeah.
it's still, it's like I really do hope that most of the time I'm showing up as I am and can be real with most of the people in my life about how I'm doing, who I am, what I love, why I spend my time the way I do.
Absolutely. I have to share this story that Arya, she mic dropped me the other night.
Oh, I love these stories.
So we were talking about, this is a whole nother thing, but I took my first dance class last night. Which has been, last time I danced was high school, senior. I mean, except in my kitchen like an idiot, right? But so it was a big deal.
That's crazy to me because you are a dancer. Like you are a dancer. I know you as a dancer. Like, well, the one to get out on the dance floor and like break it down and do her thing.
And I completely forgot about that part of me completely for years. And I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot how much I love to dance. And so that I would be more intentional of putting music on in the kitchen and stuff. But yeah, you're right. Like even being there last night when everyone was introducing themselves, some of them had taken dance and like my last formal dance class was 4th grade. Like, and then I danced on my high school dancing, which was like go to a camp and learn a dance and then perform it, So I was like, I never really classified myself as a dancer.
Yeah.
But man, like that lit me up big time. Because I think there maybe was this, somewhere, and I actually have joked about this before, when I would watch Dancing with the Stars, I would like involuntary twitch as I'm watching it. And I'm like, I must have been a ballroom dancer in a former life because I could not sit still.
Oh my gosh, I love the vision of that.
Oh yeah. Truly,
I
I
hope
was
that is
like,
the case.
what's going on over there, Tammy? So I think, maybe there is this part of me that's like always needed to express this in a different way,
Mhm.
That was very powerful. But the whole reason we were talking about it was because Arya was talking about like, oh, you should do your hair like this for your first night, mom. And I'm like, Arya, it's dance practice. And she said something about my hair doesn't really grow that fast anymore. She's like, well, you know why that is, mom. And I'm like, why? She's like, because you dye it blonde. I'm like, whatever, shut. And I said, I can't do brown. I can't do brown. Like, I feel like it just like waters me down. And I said, like, blonde, just like, I feel like it brings out my personality. And she goes, you can do brown, but I just don't think you liked who you were when your hair was brown. Oh, she's like,
Oh my gosh.
yeah. And she's like, you like who you are now. She's like, your blonde hair has nothing to do with it. You just like who you are now. And I was like,
Yeah. That is a mic drop for you. Like,
It
that
was.
gives me something to think about and process again, right?
I immediately had tears in my eyes and I was like, well, you're not wrong. Because I look back when I tried to like go back to my natural hair color and I was a shell of who I was. I had
Yeah.
no idea who I was in that period of my life. So
Mhm.
absolutely identify that. Like, oh, it's the
Mm.
hair. Like, no, you didn't know who you were and you were completely struggling. Now you know who you are. You can rock any hair color. And I was just like,
Yeah.
oh yeah. So I was like, how much do I owe you for freaking therapy, Haria? Like 10.
I mean, I swear to God, this next generation of
I
kids, like,
know.
there is a level of wisdom in them that I don't know. My 11-year-old in particular is like, her name is Lizzie, and we often will say like, "Oh, she's got a lot of wisdom to share with us today," because we're like, she'll say things and I'm like way wise beyond her years, and I'm like, why didn't I know that when I was your age? And then I'm like encouraging it for her, like, I hope you know, like what you said was really impactful, like to
Oh,
validate like what she said, because it really like there are moments where she just stops me and like that's the best lesson I've learned all month, all year, maybe all my life, who knows? But it's just amazing what this generation is doing and the
yeah.
awareness that they're building. And I think that's partly because we're open to it too, right? Like
Right.
we're
That's just it.
open
You
to
have
it.
to be open because some parents might
Yeah.
be like, you don't tell me, like, you're not, and
Yeah.
would brush it off. But oh my gosh, our kids are the best teachers. And I
Yes.
love that you are validating that for her and
Yeah.
letting her, you're sending the message like what you say matters.
Yeah.
Keep using your voice. Like, that's, oh man, talk about how many
Yeah.
adults like can't like speak their truth or even speak up
Yeah.
because maybe didn't have someone saying that to them. And it was like, shh, be seen, not heard, all of those messages growing up. I mean, how many times
Yeah.
were we shushed as a baby? And for
Yeah.
you to be like, oh my gosh, like what you say is like,
It
that's powerful.
matters.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
Oh.
Well, and it makes me think back to when we were chatting a little bit, and how sometimes we would maybe like dim our success. Like,
Mhm.
how has that kind of showed up in your life? And I know there was a particular moment where you really standing in your truth and being who you were, like how it felt, but also the feedback that you got. And I think, again, I wanted people to hear that message of how powerful, like, that is what leads to
Yeah.
success, people. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm following you here, it's kind of talking about when I first took on the role of editor in chief of the magazine. I had I've spent my entire career at this magazine and I had a really amazing leadership team. Our founding editor was phenomenal, had set the values and the foundation for everything we were doing. And when she made that decision to leave and was kind of preparing me to take on more responsibility, it was like, "Oh, okay, now I know how she does it, so I can do it too." And that was really important. It was important to know those things. But I found myself in that first year of the role, kind of not showing up as myself in the role because I was like, "Oh, this is how it's supposed to be done." It's kind of like I had this little voice on my shoulder, her voice, which had taught me so many amazing things. And it was like reminding me of things. But I realized, like, I wasn't doing that role as myself. And so I wasn't really serving the team that I was, like, now leading, and that was a whole other thing. It's like, "No, you're the leader of this thing. You've gotta take that on. Plus, you've gotta do this magazine thing and edit," and, like, this is how she
yeah.
would do it. And
Yep.
it took me a good year of kinda struggling through that and, like, "Okay, why is this so hard? Like, this shouldn't be this hard." And it really I don't even know what the turning point was, but I just remember at one point thinking, like, "If I don't start, like, thinking about this as me and bringing my own experiences, my own knowledge to this, yes, I can still have those lessons in my head, but I have to do this as me or this is never gonna work in
Yes.
the long term. Like, how do I edit as Jamie and not, as the former editor? I mean, Pilar is amazing. I'm still in contact with her. I still learn things from her, but when I was trying to be her in the role,
Yeah.
it does not work. There was no way I was gonna succeed that way. And it was finally probably it had to have been a year in where I was like, okay, this is not work. It was just so painful at moments. And I was like, "Do I wanna do this if I keep going like this?" But ultimately, it was like, "No, this is how I would do it," and I think that has been freeing for my whole team to know that, like, this is her showing up in this role. This is her doing it her way, and not trying to force another way of doing it anymore, It's something that's really authentic to who we are and the evolution of the team, which is what it was. We couldn't it was a change that happened. We couldn't keep the old way without
Right.
people had changed. The leadership had changed. We had to change too, and I had to change how I approached it.
Yeah. Well, and in doing that, one, again, you're giving your, because I think why it can feel so triggering, like, why isn't this working? Because your inner
Mhm.
child's like, yo, we're not putting on masks again. We're not going to be
Yeah,
other people again. Like we did that
yeah,
before. you've done enough work. We're not going back to that. And so sometimes when we meet resistance, like you have to sit with that. 'Cause like maybe this is not the way. You're getting further or further away from who you are and what your gifts are. So of course it's going to feel like paddling upstream. But
Yep.
when you are authentically yourself and showing up, it's like it's ease, it's floating. Like it's
Well,
why wouldn't you want to float down the river? Why would
right.
you choose to paddle upstream by trying to be someone that you're not? And I think if that is like
Mhm.
the take home message from today's episode, is like if you find yourself feeling like I've got to do it this a certain way to meet this person's expectations, like you're literally paddling upstream and it is so much easier to just be you. That's the hard
100%.
part.
And
That's the
that's
hard part because
true.
like I
Yeah.
gotta take all these masks and these roles off and who is me? And that's the journey you
Yes.
gotta go on. And that's what people are like, no thanks.
Yeah, but that and to that point, I will say, like, as a woman in a corporate role, I'm in technically in like an executive role in a big company, there are still like you do still have to adapt your real
Yes.
you for certain
Yes.
circumstances. Like you have to know your audience. And like
Yeah.
there's certain ways I show up with like my core team of editorial team that's different than when I have to go into the boardroom and I'm there and I'm presenting or whatever. But it's still like I have to remember who I am, and that takes
Yes.
really being intentional a lot of the time, like, how do I
Mhm.
wanna show up today?
Yeah.
And reminding myself, like, it's okay to adapt this, like, it's a
Yes.
little bit more of the professional, authentic Jamie, and then more of, like,
Yes.
the fun-loving at-home Jamie or the
Right.
EL Jamie, but
Yes.
it's all bringing those core values of my own, like, how do I wanna be? I wanna be myself. Right? Like, in these moments, but knowing, like, how I speak might be slightly differently for this audience versus that one, and I think that's an intentional awareness that you have to have,
Yeah.
as you approach different circumstances, both personally and professionally, I think.
Absolutely, and I love that it's almost like, "Okay, I need to have this anchor of who I am."
Yes.
And then
Yeah.
from there, like, I'm not gonna if I were to go on your podcast, I'm probably not gonna drop an F-bomb. I'm probably gonna be a little more like, "Tammy, here's your notes and what to talk about." Not completely unscripted and winging it and swearing like I do on here.
You can swear on ours, that just happened yesterday
Ooh.
when we recorded, I was like, "Well, we're gonna have to mark this as explicit." Okay.
Whoops.
It happens
Uh,
sometimes.
yeah, absolutely. But
Uh,
I love that so much and that the whole point is everything is going to come with more ease when we just truly are who we are. But that is the hard work. The hard work is like, well,
mhm.
who am I? Because it is
Yeah.
years and years and years of wearing mask and your ego taking over. And that's the hard work. Once you figure out who you are, then it's easier to adapt. And that's when I was talking about the whole chrysalis thing is there was a period where I wasn't in a place where I could adapt. And I was so
Right.
fragile. I couldn't be trusted to not revert back to old ways. It was like, nope, you got to stay in here until you're done. And now I know there are moments where, like, I don't feel like I have to dim my light anymore, but there are moments where I now know I have those energetic boundaries of who I'm gonna share certain things with, who's gonna have access to my energy,
Yep.
where I notice when I've lit up or where I'm drained, like, I'm just a little bit more protective of that because it's like I've worked so hard to figure this out.
Right.
But what you have done as well by being authentically you and showing up that way, it allows your team to do the same thing. Like, "Oh, if
Mhm.
I'm in this role, maybe it's not that I have to do it the Jamie way. Maybe what makes this special job that I have is that I bring my own essence into it." So it feels like you're encouraging everyone to bring the parts of them into
Yeah.
this job. Otherwise, everyone's just like this robot and like, this is how we do things. But you're bringing like all of this expression from everybody's personalities and everybody's styles and giving them permission to do that because you're doing that. Like, that's freaking
Right.
leadership. Whoa.
Well, and our magazine is called Experience Life, and not everybody is experiencing life like me, right?
Yes.
So, like,
Oh,
that's what I encourage when, like, we're going into a
yeah.
planning meeting or brainstorming. It's like, how are you experiencing things? What are you experiencing? What are people experiencing? Like, we have to be thinking about the broader human experience, ideally, right? And it's not just one way or another. Like, how do we encourage bringing that in and letting each of my editors or anybody who's contributing, you know, own the parts of it that are them within it, because that is where like you really connect and relate with people. And I think that's one of the unique things about like what experience life is in the health and wellness space, like it's not we're all not trying to aspire to like the six pack abs situation. Like that's a great thing if that's for you. But it's like show up as you are, take
Yeah.
what you need from this,
Yes.
and take the next step tomorrow that's right for you. But like we want you to relate to something in this, and we hope there's a voice in here, and it's not just one voice, it's many voices
Yes.
that you in some way can connect with. Because really all we want, and you think about this, like we all want to belong, we want to feel connected to people. And we want our experiences to be validated. Like I'm not alone in this because oftentimes we do feel alone in this world, and that's hard. But we just want to create a space of belonging. And I think, I don't know, there's something about being able to tell stories in the magazine that I think is really special. Like to be able to tell stories that are true experiences, but also carry real information
Yeah.
and real data that can help people do something different. And it might ultimately help them realize that they can change the story they're telling themselves. Like, they're like, this is just the way I am. Like, I don't think that's true. Like, there
Well,
was a
you were
podcast that we did
conditioned.
not too long ago. Right. We did an episode of the podcast with this author. Her name's Amber Lyon. She just had a book come out called You Are a Magnet. And she was telling, like, she's from New Zealand. She grew up in a family with addiction. And she has a very distinct memory of her dad, like, talking with her dad about, like, kind of why he was behaving the way he was. Like, this is just the way I am. And she remembers that being a point where, like, but change is possible. Like, we all,
Yeah.
so it's like the stories we tell ourselves matter. So if you can see other people changing their story or making change, like, that's possible for any of us. We just have to be willing and to do that work. And it is work. It is not easy. And you are going to slide backward and you're going to fall back into old habits. Oh my gosh, my poor husband is the one who sees me fall back into my old habits more often than anyone else because he's the person I feel safest with, right?
100%.
You know, my family of origin sees me kind of return to some of those ugly parts of myself because I feel safe with them.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that progress hasn't been made and that I'm not changing that story, hopefully for the better and healthier in the long run.
Right. It's kind of like the cha-cha. Like you're somebody like take 2 steps back
Oh,
and then it's like hopefully you're always moving forward. But
yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's part of it is I now see that when I have setbacks, it's like, oh no, there
yeah.
was just like a little nugget I forgot back there. Or maybe I
Mhm.
just needed reassurance, like, oh wait, I actually am not that person anymore. Like I might have gotten triggered and reacted, but really it just helped me stand firmer in where I'm at now and who I want to be. And so sometimes it's like I appreciate those moments where I'm pulled back because either it slingshots me forward or it's an opportunity for me to look how far I've actually come.
Right, right.
Or it was, just a downward spiral. I feel like I
Yeah.
couldn't get back up the hill. Like, no, it's just no.
But I think those setbacks, like, they're also like a reminder of the patterns, right? Like,
Yes.
oh, this is a pattern that I fall into. And like, once you're aware of the pattern, that's when you can change it. If
Right.
you're not aware of it in the first place, there's no way you can
Yes.
change it.
Yep.
And I think I did want to talk about this a little bit because I do think it's important. Like one thing I shared with you is that like we do therapy. I do therapy on my own. My husband and I do couples therapy. And that is like work that we're choosing to do because we want to show up better in the world and like kind of process whatever the stories are that we've been carrying with us, whether it's a story about our financial capabilities, our stories about, just like how we raise our kids. Like there are things that we can go in and talk about and challenge for each other. And that is work that we are choosing to do. And it's really funny because my husband, since we started this now 2 years ago, he tells anybody who asks him like that he thinks it's worth it, like that the difference that it makes
God.
because it's allowed us to process both individually and together, like
Yes.
where we've been, where we are, and hopefully help inform where we're going next. Right.
Oh, wow. That's huge. Well, and what you're doing too is that you're creating, again, like a safe environment to unpack some of this stuff and to be able to
Yeah.
look at it, but you're also being intentional about it,
Yeah.
because I think couples can say, like, oh, yeah, we need to talk about this. And then it never happens and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And then it's all of a sudden weeks go by, months go by, years go by, you know,
Yeah.
and
And
like,
these things are lingering and building and resentments are growing and all these things. I mean, like, and that is what happened that prompted us to go. Like, we got to a
yeah,
point where I was like, okay, we either deal with like we need to process this, we need to peel back the
yeah,
layers, or we're in trouble.
yeah,
Like it was kind of a choice point for us a few years ago because it was really we were going through some hard stuff. And if we had not done that, like we peeled back layers, and it's really interesting when you get back to what are the core things, the reasons why, where it stems from. It's
yep.
often childhood.
What do you know?
Like,
Childhood. Oh,
I
here we go.
I'm constantly amazed. Like we go in there like, oh, I got to talk about this. And then when you really start talking about it, what it actually goes back to. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just stories that have been, and there's something about like, isn't it something like before age 7, the stories that become ingrained in us and become like what we know and hold as true?
Yeah.
Like that is crazy. Because
Right.
that, but it's tied to experience. And again, I want to reiterate, like I had a really great childhood growing up, but that doesn't mean like that still there aren't lessons. I mean, have you seen Inside Out 2 yet?
No, I was wanting to see it tomorrow. I'm like,
You need to go.
no,
Well, I saw it
I've already
and I
seen like so
actually
many little memes of it. And I'm like, I can't. I'm having a real hard time. So I
but
might just,
it was so good because they get into this whole thing with like, these I don't know how to describe like stories that then become beliefs and they they're taking these core things that they put in the area of belief and then it becomes this
oh,
strand that we go back to and we repeat. Like they were like you'll see it like they flick this string, it's like I'm enough or I'm kind. But then all of a sudden as they get to be teenagers, how those stories start to change with anxiety. So you'll see this. It was
oh,
with my sister and my niece and my girls. And I was like, "Oh, that started when we were really young." And then it just like those teenage years, those emotional, hormonal, like transitional years, they just embed news stories and how many things go back to that. So that's my point is like there's a willingness that needs to happen to kind of challenge the stories and the things that the beliefs that we have thought to be true. Byron Katie is are you familiar with Byron
mhm,
Katie's work? Like, yeah, I mean,
yes.
like the questioning, like, is this really true?
Yeah.
Like being willing to push back a little bit on these things that we sometimes just repeat over and over in our minds.
Yeah. And especially when you start to hear the way, like, oh, it's always the way it was, or this is how it should be. This is what I've always done. Like all of those things, like those are the ones where you're like, hold up, does that
Mhm.
feel aligned for me? Because, and again, it may be very different than the people you grow up with. But like, it
Right.
is that true for me?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's like this whole journey is like coming back to self and finding that anchor of self. And again, that's what I can see that you have done that so beautifully is really anchored in who I am. And that's allowed all of these other avenues and outlets to just flow in your life. And even with therapy and stuff, it's like, it's not just that you guys went to like, oh, we have a wound, let's go fix it and put a band-aid over it. Like, and now we're going to be proactive.
Yeah.
Like, maybe we stopped the bleeding, but, like, that's something, like, we're still gonna do this work and still tend to it and be proactive. And
Yeah.
that's beautiful and powerful. Because how many people are like, either, "Oh, it's not working," or, "I think we're good now," and then you stop
Yeah.
having the conversations that, like, needed to happen and to continue to dig and to evolve. There's so much that can evolve from those simple conversations and just honoring your experience.
Oh, yes.
Powerful
It's
stuff.
been so amazing. And when we started, we were going more regularly. And now it's like we go, like we were actually supposed to go today, but we were just there 2 weeks ago. My husband's like, do we really need to go? I mean, I feel it's like, I don't know. Like we pushed it out another week. I'm like, perfect. Like this works better with the schedules. But it's just now it's kind of more of a maintenance thing and where we're able to talk through. Sometimes now it's just everyday things that
Yeah.
we don't realize really are like that push somebody a different way like that. Oh, I didn't realize that that had that effect on you. And now I'm aware of it. And
Yep.
now, like, as we come home and we process it and we go for a walk and we talk through how you felt, and it's just opened these lines of communication in a way that are great. And again, it's not perfect in any way, but it's still a willingness to kind of
Yeah.
do the work, and to be willing because it's like you and I talked about Glennon Doyle, her work and how she at one point was questioned like if I'm not willing to wouldn't want this for my daughters, why would I want it for me, right? And that a couple years ago was kind of where my head was at too. I was like, oh
Yeah.
gosh, this is really hard. Would I want my girls to be dealing with this? And
Yeah.
that's when my husband and I talked and decided to go do these things. And I think that's really important. Like if we wouldn't want this for somebody else in our life, why would I want it for me? And that's where we can become like, we can change this, we can change this story, and we can do it in a way that's real for us.
And again, like inner child stuff. And that was where I know exactly what phrase you're talking about from that book because I
Yeah.
was on a run and I literally stopped dead in my tracks and started sobbing because I knew the answer immediately was like, no, no.
Mhm. Yeah.
But then I knew my answer, which meant, oh no. I
I've
was
got to
just,
deal with something like, oh,
yeah. Yeah.
life is hard.
Yeah. I remember when I first like got real about doing this and how I wanted it to feel. And I said to my friend Zoe, I'm like, I just want it to be a conversation. I just want it
Yeah.
to be unscripted. Like because I know when I get scripted, then I feel like I'm putting myself in the box and everything's got to be perfect. It triggers my inner
Oh,
perfectionist. Whereas when I can just be here and fall off a stool and like that is my inner child being like, girl, we're just having fun. Like, I don't want to be perfect. That's what it was coming back to, was like this
uh-huh.
perfectionist thing. Like, just, I don't know. Yeah, I should probably wrap this up. I can go
Well,
down
I mean,
another long tangent.
okay. But I think that's huge. And I think what's important, even just about the point of perfection, I go back to, I will never forget walking into my older daughter's second grade classroom. This was several years ago now. And the motto on the wall was practice makes progress, not practice makes perfection. And that's like everyday life, right? Like every day is a practice in its own right. Like how we show up today, how we show up tomorrow, like we're practicing different ways. And there is no such thing as perfect. Like it's just showing up and making progress, and that progress is going to have starts and stops, right?
Yes.
Um, and so how can we just like hopefully just get okay with where we are and that, and hopefully just get okay with who we are and be authentic in that. I mean, that's my goal for myself. That's what I want to encourage for my kids. That's what I want for my team. It's what I want for anybody who reads the magazine or listens to our podcast, is to see like we all just got to show up as who we are.
Yeah. And
Um,
that message totally comes through. And I think you do create such a safe space for people to come where they are, meet themselves where they're at. And like you
mhm.
said, like take what you need, and that's kind of what same
Yeah.
thing with here with this podcast of, I know not every episode is going to resonate. And I know not every story maybe I share is going to like specifically be your story. But if you listen close enough,
Yeah.
usually there's something in there for you. And
Right.
and that's where, like,
What's
when
the
you're sharing
one
your
thing?
stories about reputation, about being projected upon, like all this stuff, like all of a sudden you feel that little, oh,
Mhm,
your inner child is telling you something there. But yeah, I know in many instances, like I think we both have perfectionist tendencies.
mhm.
And that's been a huge part of us just being able to show up in the work that we do and just allowing ourselves to try to be curious, to show up as we are, and knowing like what inner child wants to feel perfect. Like, why is that even a thing or expectation? But like ego has really attached this identity, like, well, that's when you receive praise and love.
Right,
And
right.
so I feel like I'm having like a million full circle moments. There's so many things that you said, and I was like, I should write that down and I come back to it. So now I'm like, now I'm slowly coming back to all of them.
Let's just keep going in circles. I got a little more time.
Yeah, all
Um,
right. Everyone's gonna be like, I cannot follow this episode to save my life, Tammy.
I don't even care. I just love this conversation. It's
Uh,
fine.
yeah.
Yeah. I know you just said something too. I'm like, oh, I want to come back to that. Now I can't remember what it was either. Look at us, just both losing our train of
Just
thought.
hey, let's just own our story. This is where we're at in life. If it's
It's good. It's good. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So I'm an editor, right? Like, we're in the process of finalizing an issue right now. And I had this conversation with my copy editor yesterday. So copy editor, if people don't know, like copy editor, copy chief, they're responsible for making sure like there's no typos, that the sentences are structured correctly, all these things. It's a lot. You're a detailed oriented person and
yeah.
you don't want to miss anything, right? And that's a hard thing. And I remember saying, I just said this yesterday to my copy editor. I was like, we have to remember that we are doing a great job, but that we could look at this story again
Yeah.
and again, and we would change something every single time.
Yep.
This story, we could always find something to change. But when is it like this is good. This is good enough and we are gonna go. Like this is what it is. And I think again, no such thing as perfect. Like, yes, there's probably something else we could change, but at some point you have to say, done. Like sending this baby off
Right.
into the world. And I hope somebody takes something from it, right? And I hope that's what people take from this episode, is that I hope that there's something in here, just a little bit of something that you find that maybe is connects with you and makes you feel like, oh, maybe there's something for you to go do next. I don't know, one small thing.
Right. Well, and yes, I think about some of the major takeaways was one, giving your inner child permission to try it. Like, no, I want to try new things. Be curious, go
Mhm,
out there, take inspired action. Like that's what you
mhm.
have done throughout all of this. Can you hear my heart rate monitor that I forgot to unplug beeping back there? That's what
That
that
your
was.
heart rate might? Oh, that's funny. Look at her over
I wore
there.
this layer, like apparently I forgot to detach that. So for those of you that like my apartment's gonna blow up, it's not a bomb, it's my heart rate monitor, which it did feel like it was gonna blow up today. Oh, but
Oh,
yeah, like it requires taking inspired action. And sometimes you have to do it scared and you have to do it, like you said, maybe I was naive. Like just I don't even care what happens. Release any expectations and just allow yourself to be curious and put yourself out there and see what happens. And if it doesn't work, it's redirection to what does.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
man, that can just like propel you forward. And it's so cool how that literally propelled you from intern to editor. Like,
Right.
how incredible is that? But that required you to remove layers of who you weren't so you could show up as who you are.
Yeah.
And what a beautiful evolution from your career to that have happened like in that role
Mhm.
where it's like
Yeah.
there's so much pressure to be all the things and do all the things and act this way. And you're like, you know what? This is asking me to just be me. Whoa,
Right.
whoa. And the reason that's so much easier is because think about all of the extra effort that takes to like read the room and what does this person need and what is that like we put on so we take on so much energy of trying to be who we're not. And it's
Right.
so you free up so much energy when you just get to show up as you. But that is a scary thing for ego when it's like, well, that wasn't good enough growing up. So
Right.
I got to do the work.
Right. Okay, I wanna add one last thing
Yeah.
because I was thinking, and this is the thing, it's like, we just need to all remember that we are human, we are imperfect, but we are meant to be where like, who we are, right? And things are gonna happen that we can't control, but when we do have choices, like, there's things we can do, right? Like, we can choose the positive or the negative, but hopefully it's the positive. I really hope for that. Um, One thing that I did, when I took on this role of editor in chief, it was like, oh, we write all these things about how to live a healthy life. Like, oh, I got to do all these things healthy, right? Like, if I'm going to do this, I have to walk the talk and I have to do everything. And then it was like, again, stepping back and be like, no, I need to edit this a little bit because I'm still a human being and I can do certain things at certain points in my life. And I'm going to be, I'm not going to pretend I'm eating healthy all the time or that I'm working out perfectly or that like my relationships are perfect. Like they're all a work in progress.
Yeah.
Like we're all human. And it's like, if we can just own that and accept that piece of it, like the humanness in all of us, and like that we're all facing something and dealing with something. And sometimes it's easier than others. And sometimes it's really freaking hard. And we just got to get through the days. Um,
I love
but
that.
don't try to be perfect, and I learned that I'm like, "I've gotta stop. I gotta stop pretending," and that's what I often write my letters about is like, "This is what I'm dealing with now because I want you to know that I am not perfect in this. I wanna connect with you." So, anyway.
I have absolutely found that like when I started opening up as a dietitian who was emotional binge eater, oh, like all this weight came off and it was just then
Yes.
people felt safe around me and I felt
Mhm.
safe to share my story. And that's when I feel like I truly connect with people most is when I share my
Yes.
most vulnerable moments. It's not when I'm hiding. It's not when I'm perfect. It's not when I'm out there like everything looks great.
Yeah.
Like people like need to know they're human too.
The human
And that
condition.
yeah, and then they've had to work through stuff to get here too. They don't she's not just an editor. That didn't just happen. Like that required a lot of work.
Mhm.
And, even for me to be doing the stuff that I'm doing, like that
Yes.
required me to literally dissolve who I was. Just like
Right.
my like, yeah, like I could
To
have
be a
given
pile of mush in a little
yeah,
for a little
absolutely.
while.
But yeah, was it easier to work my 9 to 5 clinical nutrition job that was steady paycheck and da 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 da? Like, was that easier? In some ways, on the surface, yes. But again, when I look back, like I was a shell of who I was and I wasn't fully expressing any parts of myself. And it was just like that evolution is so important for everyone to like, there is so much choice that can come with making the change in our lives. And you had spoke to that before of this choice and change and
Yeah.
like, just do the things and go for it and don't set any limits. And it's amazing what can happen. And that's why I love you and I love how it's such a beautiful relationship of like women helping women because I
Mhm.
could easily look at you and be like, well, must be nice or feel like jealous that you're where you're at and and
Right.
I have absolutely had moments in my life like that. Well, what that made me realize was that was a deep desire in me to see you doing what you're doing. It's like, how is she putting herself out there? How is she going for these things? Because inside it was like, because you should be too, Tammy.
Mhm.
And it's like
There's
this
something
whole
we're
like must
seeing
be
that
nice.
we want. Yeah,
Yes,
that we're
like that.
desiring ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and I love that I could just truly feel like just nothing but love and support
Mhm.
for another woman. Like, no, you inspire the hell out of me. Like, and you inspire so many women. So it's like, please don't ever dim your light or not shout out these amazing accolades because you inspire women like me that it is possible. And like, I know it, that goes even beyond like in the cities or the 2 million people that are reading, but like people that you grew up with be like, whoa. And that's where I got to see her speak on stage. And that's when we reconnected last fall because we both got to speak back at our
Yeah.
old stomping grounds. And she was the keynote speaker. And I was just like, my baby girls.
Well, you need to know the feeling is mutual, you know, and I think we've all had those moments where we've looked at each other like, how is she doing it? How can like what do like seeing like really it's what is that whole thing like with like it's envy or whatever. Like I want like when you feel those feelings, it's because you see something that you're like desiring for yourself. And you were doing that for women and so many people too. So just know that you're doing the amazing work. I'm so proud of you. I love you. Oh, I'm so glad we got to connect and do this. I know we've been
know.
talking about it for a while.
Yes.
But I mean, let's keep doing what we're doing. I mean, I think this is what we get to do this. Like that's what I try to remember. Like we
Yes.
get to do this. We don't have to do this. We get to, you
Absolutely.
know, and who knows what we'll be doing in 10 years. I hope that we can still reconnect in some way, shape, or form like this in 10 years and have like the evolution of this conversation.
Ooh, I'm manifesting that
I
right
kind
now.
of put a timestamp on it. Okay, what are
Right?
June-
And it's, oh my gosh, if you could have just waited 1 minute to say that, it would have been 11:11. Ding.
Wow.
But it did
So close.
111, which is a big manifesting number. So I'm going to take that.
I love your love of
It is a
numbers.
full moon today. So all the things. We're recording this on Friday for those of you watching on Tuesday or whenever you watch this. But yeah,
Yeah.
very into those little signs and synchronicities. But
We're just putting it out in the world.
We need to keep doing this work because we are like trying to awaken the masses to people stepping into who you are, because that's where the success is. And you said that, like that was when I was my most successful was when I was me. And
Mhm.
that's same.
And that's when I feel, and this goes back to the work, that's when I feel healthiest and happiest, right? When I'm being me. When I am not myself. I don't feel as healthy and happy. So like again, always a work in progress, but that is truly like getting to do this work and see how this shows up for other people. And that's what I find over and over again in the stories that we hear too. So
I love it. So for those of you that need to follow Experience Life, tell them all the ways that they can find you guys and listen to
Yeah.
you, because they can now, like raging fans of you, can listen to you all the time.
oh gosh, I love this. Well, if you want to find the magazine, it's experiencelife.com. You can go there, you can subscribe. You do not have to be a member of Lifetime, which publishes us. You can also get our content in the Lifetime app if people are interested. That's now free for anybody to download. It's not just content, but there's also workouts and all sorts of cool things that you can do in that. At Experience Life Magazine, at Experience Life Mag. I don't even know which ones are which, but Instagram, Facebook, if you search for Experience Life Magazine, you'll find us there. I'm at Jamie Martin EL on Instagram. I mainly post like about my personal life on my public forum, but that's my life and I love it. So that's
Yeah.
where I'm at. I think that's it. Oh, and the podcast. You can find the podcast at experiencelife.com/podcasts and find that on Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen. So Lifetime Talks, it's really all sorts of healthy living topics that we
And
cover.
so good. Like I was kind of binge listening for the last couple of weeks. And I was like, oh my God, like the topics are so good, so informative. Like, and I was just always trusted because I used to be obsessed with fitness magazines, not a health and wellness magazine that you guys were putting out. Mine were like, try to look this exact way, only eat this much and that kind of stuff. And so I just remember for the first time opening up Experience Life, is like it literally felt like a safe place, like a
Yes.
safe resource, because man, we are filled with lots of stuff out there. And it really truly felt like this is legit. And
Yeah.
there was just an energy of like genuine love and care and all the things in that magazine. So it's very, very, very well done. So props to all of you and your team and you, and just thank you for showing up as you, because you are changing the world one reader and listener and all the things at a time. So
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. And I just love you. Thank you for having me. This was fun. Let's do it again.
was awesome. Well, thank you. All right, everybody, I'm gonna let her go. I actually have to get to my dance or my daughter's another
Actually,
dance.
really neat.
No, I'm good. I think I've
Okay.
got 20 minutes. We're good. But I'm watching the time. Like I'm not gonna be running on this one. But yes, I'm very excited about that. And that was actually her dance recital just a couple weeks ago is what really spurred. I was like, nope, we're doing this, Tammy. Like you are gonna fully express and like get back into this part of you. And so you gotta look for those little nuggets throughout your life. Like what are the things that light you up? And you're like, that was really enjoyable. Go follow that. And that's sort of like,
Yeah.
I'm doing it. I'm doing it. So
Yep. Make
So
it
I'm
happen.
sure there'll be a whole podcast episode on my dancing experience, but for now, I got to go see her. So, but thank you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. And again, I love and adore you. And I'm so grateful that you get to be part of my little soul family and never leave.
You never leave.
And never
Yeah,
going
it's
to be like my
mutual.
7th grade friend.
We are connected forever.
We are.
lady.
I do genuinely feel that. Like we have an energetic bond that I cherish and love. So thank you so much. All right, everybody, we're signing off. We will see you next week.